There is nothing I'd like more than to help a new generation of Buccaneers do better than I did.
Ballroom scene from The Buccaneers, the BBC's latest drama which cost £1 million per episode to make. In this programme we go behind the scenes to get an insight into the making of this 5-part series, which was filmed in more than 20 of the most lavish Victorian locations on both sides of the Atlantic.
The reason why I wanted to do the book as a film, as a 5-part film, is simply that Wharton touched on the new burgeoning woman, the free woman of America, who was carrying on and fulfilling her parents' desires, only to find that she had to rebel against them to be true to herself.
The BBC's Buccaneers is an adaptation of a novel written by an American, Edith Wharton. Although she's not as well known here as she is in the States, there's been a rising interest in her writing, especially since the film The Age of Innocence. Is she a neglected female writer? The answer is probably yes. And The Buccaneers was the obvious one of her books to televise for a UK audience because it's set in England. Edith Wharton visited England frequently. In fact, she once stayed with friends in this very house, Stanway, and then used it as a model for Honours Love in The Buccaneers. Not surprisingly, the BBC came to film here. Although she loved Europe, Edith was first and foremost an American.
History goes faster in America than it does anywhere else in the world, and everything happens faster. There were two very distinct social groups in Edith Wharton's New York: the aristocracy and nouveau riche families from the West, who sought to make their wealth authentic by gaining entry to aristocratic old New York, its parties, its balls, its social circle.
Anyone tell me why Miss Clausen is the only one invited to Miss Parmore's ball?
Because of Lord Richard, of course.
And who are the Clausens, pray? And where do they come from?
For that matter, Mother, who are we? Where do we come from?
But something very dramatic was happening in America at the end of the 19th century. After the Depression which followed the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution really took off, and cities like Chicago were doubling in size every decade. There was a massive wave of immigration, and people got rich, and people got rich fast. Colonel St. George would have made his money in steel, in stock, in railroads, in the utilities, and in banking.
Nice young men will show up in greater numbers if I can put this deal through.
Papa got rich on the Pacific Railroad or something, and we got a house on Madison Avenue. Only, as soon as we moved in, Mother realized no one lives on Madison Avenue anymore.
Are you looking forward to going back to New York?
No, because it will be the same as it always is. Mother will send her cards to the right people, and we still won't get invited to the right parties. And Mother and Virginia spend the whole time moaning about it. Can't imagine how boring it is.
Don't do that, dear.
Edith Wharton came out into New York society when she was quite young. She was a very awkward debutante. She describes her first ball as a nightmare of self-consciousness. The people with whom she mixed were sometimes called the 400, and 400 was the number that would fit into Mrs. Astor's ballroom. So, in a sense, old New York society couldn't grow any larger than 400 people. So you can see the sort of intense competition that the St. George's faced. If you had to wait for somebody to die or give up dancing before you could join that exclusive group. But this was the world that Wharton knew. You could reach out and touch the edges of it.
And who is this? This is my new pupil, Mrs. Parmore. Miss Annabel St. George. St. George?
Yes,
No. It's not a name I'm familiar with.
When Mrs. Parmore looks through Nan after Laura Tesfaye takes her to visit at her house, it's because she doesn't recognise the name. St George? No, I don't know the name, she says. She would have known the name of everybody in the right set in New York and Newport, and it was a closed set.
I trust my own daughter would never consent to an engagement of less than 2 years. But I suppose, among the people that you're with now, there are no social traditions. It is naturally a very different experience from being with you, Mrs. Palmore. I consider myself very fortunate to have had such a distinguished introduction to America.
British people tend to imagine America as a classless society, and that's quite untrue. I mean, as you can see from watching the Buccaneers.
To understand the Buccaneers, it is crucial to grasp the idea that these girls, the Buccaneers, are very beautiful and very rich and are making an assault on the English aristocracy. They have been rebuffed by the social elite in New York and are determined to make their way in the world by marrying an English title.
Oh, that's what Miss March calls you, the Buccaneers.
Buccaneers?
Yes. Because she says, the English invaded America, now it's your turn.
Don't you just love it? There's tea on the terrace.
How can you escape 4 girls called the Buccaneers from different backgrounds, 2 of them sisters, whose primary motive and interest by their parents is to find English aristocracy? Now, what is the main weapon they are going to offer? We know that they have money.
And money is something the aristocracy in England were short of in this period. In fact, there were some famous examples of English aristocrats marrying American heiresses. The Duke of Marlborough married Consuelo Vanderbilt, and Winston Churchill's father, Sir Randolph Churchill, married Jenny Jerome. When Edith Wharton was visiting Britain, she moved in these circles.
Still in all, Lord Whittlesey, you are a man I could do business with. Yes, sir. I saw that the first moment I clapped eyes on you. Added to which, we each have something the other one wants. And if that's not a good beginning, I don't know what is. For instance, Lord Whittlesey, I have an electric company. You have a title.
I play the part of Lord Brilliancy. He's difficult to explain in today's terms because he's very much a figure, a dominant figure of the 19th century, who was one of the, I can't remember how many lords there were, but there were these great feudal lords who owned thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of land and employed, of course, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, built villages for them, built churches. Therefore, we're talking about a man of exceptional power. Got to, as an actor, think of this man with this immense, extraordinary power, like sort of Montgomery of Alamein, you know, incredible general, because he was all these things, generals, vicar. I know he wasn't the vicar, but he was the father figure of all these people. If you talk about 1874, is the fact that we are talking about women being a secondary race, who men considered not to have. They didn't have the vote, as we all know. They didn't have anything. They were somebody who had the men's children, and then in this particular class system, they then controlled the, as it were, the housekeepers and the cooks, and did that department once they'd had the children. That is the way women's lives happened, existed. Tough, rotten luck.
Nobody could be less sympathetic to the aristocracy than me, Sheila Hancock. I verge on the extreme left wing, and I'd like to see the lot of them abolished. But what has been interesting for me is that as an actress I have had to get inside the minds of people like this, and I have ended up having a great deal of respect for them, actually, and particularly in this period.
When the honeymoon is over, the marriage begins.
She's a woman who has been brought up to serve, to do her duty. She's inherited the role of being Duchess, and she has to hand it over to this young flibbity-gibbet American girl.
I had to go to my mother-in-law before me.
Well, at this time of the year, I number and list each fruit as it falls. The first dozen go post-haste to London for the Queen's table. This 4th train, you will be required to wear on certain occasions. Her life is totally ruled by the idea of doing what you should do, running a large estate, carrying on the line, the full aristocratic thing. From the Tsar of Russia.
I couldn't.
You couldn't what, my dear?
Wear them. They're so huge. The stones, they're the size of ostrich eggs. I couldn't carry them off.
Duchesses are like soldiers, they remain at their posts, and that's her credo. But this girl disobeys that.
I have told him that I don't want to be the mother of dukes.
Well, you should have thought of that before you became the wife of one. Life makes ugly faces at us sometimes, Nat.
Do you remember that night in Newport? When I didn't get to go to the ball, and I said to you, I didn't want to marry, I wanted to be free like you.
Yes, I do. And I told you there's a price to pay for freedom.
Laura is in some way a free spirit to Nan. She sees Laura as a free spirit, the sense that she isn't married and that she has the ability to roam around, and she's part Italian, and she has this life that Nan has never seen anyone lead before she meets Laura. And also I think they become best friends. I think if they were the same age, they would be best friends. Is a husband a fair exchange for one's best friend? With all my love, Annabelle.
Is a husband a fair exchange for one's best friend?
One really key aspect of her character and her philosophy is freedom. And she is a free spirit, and she believes strongly in freedom, and she has a very independent nature. And she's a nonconformist. She comes from a very nonconformist background. She comes from a family of revolutionaries and anarchists and anti-papists and artists, of people who questioned the society they were born into, and who had the courage to question and the courage to live in a different way.
Is self-destruction your idea of courage?
Can a woman never be free to choose her life? To love? To have her own free will?
What makes you think you haven't a free will, Miss Tess Valley? Surely you just exercised it.
I didn't really want to just see the women as victims of the rules and conventions of that period, because I think Edith is very fair-handed about that. She never blames the men in a way that a modern feminist might. She's more even-handed, I think, about that, and she sees the destructive power of a society on the men as well as the women.
It's not a question of becoming a recluse, Mother. I simply do not enjoy the sensation of being hunted for my title.
Yes, dear, so you have always said.
Always?
Since you were of an age. The first words you ever spoke were tick-tock.
Is that so?
Or it might have been clip-clop.
I doubt it. I've always liked clocks rather more than horses.
I do sometimes feel, Julius, that you have liked clocks more than anything.
The English aristocrats are a little stereotyped. Though, if you read accounts of individuals in that period, it's rather hard to out-stereotype them. But I think it was a little bit of a problem which I tried to address. I think there is a touch of stereotyping to the girls, not really to their characters, but to some of the remarks that are made about them in the books. And they're constantly referred to as beauties, and she's constantly describing their appearance and how pretty they are.
My name is Alison Elliott, and I'm playing Virginia St. George. Virginia starts out being fairly optimistic, fairly assured of her beauty and her ability to do well in society. She marries very well and has certain illusions about English society and all the pomp and beauty, large houses. And throughout the course of this story, finds out that it's not all as pretty as it is on the outside.
Are you saying that you've married me for my money?
Oh, well, come now. I think we have a fair exchange.
What about us?
She can't leave. It's not a choice of these women to walk out of their marriages. She has nowhere to go.
What about me?
Oh, you mean love, I suppose. What can I say?
The part of this character that I found most difficult was the fact that I don't think she really does fight. She doesn't fight and say, I'm not going to take that, and walk away from it. She goes through a lot of abuse, and she takes it in stride because that's her lot, and she makes the best of it, and she tries to do the best by herself and her family because this is where she is. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it.
I'm Jenny Agutter, and I'm playing Edina Hatton. Edina Hatton is she's the tenant of this rather wonderful property that we have behind, which clearly shows she's a fairly flamboyant character. I don't know whether you've been in the house, but it's very theatrical. She has a relationship with Lord Seddon, and it's a relationship that has obviously been going on for some years. She's older than him and clearly not approved of by Seddon's mother, and she is trying to keep herself going for as long as she possibly can and hoping that perhaps it will end in marriage. Well, aren't you going to offer me a cigarette? The scene that I'm shooting today takes place when she comes down very much to win her own territory back. She has had to let it out because she hasn't the money, and she's let it to these young Buccaneers who not only are taking her property over but taking her man over, and her entire life she sees slipping away. So the card game becomes rather significant of something she has to win because she wants to take it back, but they've got the luck and the means, and the house is kind of lost along with her man, I think.
Good Lord, that's it. A straight flush. Bad luck, my dear.
Oh, Lizzie, you little devil. It was luck, truly. All I had to do was play the cards. Certainly taught me a lesson. Seddon's last copper as well as my own. You're all too clever for me. Someone had better take my place.
Come now, Edina, don't lose heart.
Conchita is a very daring girl for her day and age. She is Brazilian-American. She was born in Brazil. She comes over to America with her mother and their American father. She has an American stepfather. And when the other three girls first meet her, she's wild. She's smoking in the trees. She's, dancing with her shoes off on the lawn, all these very risque things for that time, although not so risque for ours. And she is really full of a spirit of life and adventure, and she's always sort of looking to push the envelope. Her role in this scene is to try and smooth the situation out. So it's very, very dramatic, and this dictates the whole future of Virginia, and it seals Miss Hatton's fate as a lonely, desperate woman.
Miss Hatton is such an old friend of mine, Virginia. I'm sure she will be the first to congratulate me, if only you'll tell her that she may.
This scene is full of the subtleties and ironies Edith Wharton is known for, and is the climax to one of the themes of the story, the battle between the English aristocracy and the Americans, from which the Americans emerge triumphant, at least for the moment.
It was one of the scenes which is absolutely central to the book. When we came to treat it for screen, actually, it was quite a challenge because it's more like a piece of theatre. There are at least, there's all our main characters, the main women, and there's the men, and we've also got subsidiary characters, Miles and people like that, on the outskirts. And so, actually, it became a marathon to film. We've got to film it from an awful lot of different points of view. It became quite slow and laborious, not only in the filming, but because we were having to play off each other. It's actually quite an unfilmic tradition to do that kind of scene, because you would normally play things perhaps between 3 characters and are able to use, as Scorsese did in The Age of Innocence, much more intensity of performance.
The first thing I do when I'm adapting a book is to give myself 2, 3, 4 days, however long it takes, to read the book from cover to cover, very fast, very, very concentratedly, with great attention, and to keep the first strong impression I have of the book in my mind throughout everything I then do. I always go back to that first initial feeling.
It was a challenge finishing an unfinished novel, but in a way that was a challenge which we welcomed because it meant that we could have a bit more license. And I think because also this is a project which I would not put the classic tag to, it is not her best novel. Therefore I think we could make quite bold changes.
I sketched an ending. That was one of the first things I did. What I usually do is I write down my own skeleton of the whole story. Whether the whole story is there or not, I will write this skeleton down. And in this case, the end of the story wasn't there, but I wrote that into the skeleton as well. So that then I know in episode 1 that this character's eventual fate is whatever's been decided. And so I weave the necessary elements in right from the beginning.
The Buccaneers was Edith Wharton's last novel, and she wrote into the plot many of her own experiences. Her marriage was not a happy one, and the love affair she had in her mid-40s ended after a short time. It's quite possible that in writing about Nan, she was writing about herself and her own longings.
I suppose if one were married to a woman one adored, one would soon get beyond her beauty.
Then you understand.
Understand?
I mean about the beyondness of things. You know, I know there's no such word,
well,
but...
No, but there is such a feeling.
I think Nan is definitely a large aspect of Edith Wharton. And I know that she certainly was quite a courageous woman in a lot of the things that she did. What really drives Nan is a sense of a really very strong need to experience life, to experience... She has such a passion for... She really wants to know everything. And I think that this sense of wanting to experience everything really drives her. She wants to break out of the sense of propriety in some way.
Annabelle, I think you should know. Guy is here. He arrived this morning with his father first thing, for the fete.
I suppose he's here to see Felicia.
Well, darling, I don't know. But as MP for Horden, he would naturally want to have...
Of course. He should marry Felicia. Felicia would make him a perfect wife. I should go.
Annabelle, wait. Please wait. Shall I tell Guy that you're here?
Yes. Go quickly, Val. Before I lose heart.
Duke any moment now. I'd be very good. In fact, I've just had a row with the wardrobe because they won't let me wear a tiara in this scene, and they said, my God, you've got uppity, haven't you?